Last episode I got storming ahead with the engine rebuild, and I thought, let's keep going with it. Again we're going to have another double engine feature, but this time we're going to get on with the bottom end. Fun and games with the gearbox and clutch. Before getting on with fitting the clutch and gearbox, I need to sort the end plate out by removing the knackered old bearing and Layshaft bush. After getting the circlip off, I can knock the old bearing and bush out and get to work cleaning up the end plate. With the crud and rust removed, I could now press in the new sill, bush and an MB end plate bearing, finally securing it in place with a new circlip. With that done, I can now start to heat the casing up to allow the fitting of a lovely new MB race door rear hub bearing. Now I'm going to say this one more time, this is not a tutorial, and the method you see me using by applying instant gasket to the bearing outrace is a process MB recommend, and if you're going to be doing this I suggest you read through the step-by-step guide available on the MB site. It's thorough, informative and made the most sense to me. So with that little disclaimer out of the way, I can get to work pressing the bearing in using my cool little press. With that in, it's time to get the new rear hub studs in, and applying another bead of instant gasket around the top of the outer race to make a good seal with a new hub shim. Now for even more sealer between the shim and the hub plate. What I'm trying to achieve is a completely sealed rear hub bearing, and with the temporary nuts tightened down I can smear the squeezed out sealant around the whole fitting, hoping to get that nice seal. The nuts I'm using here are placeholders to just hold everything in place while the sealer sets. Later I'll add the stainless ones with the thin little washers. Next up we need to replace the Layshaft. It's a crying shame to change this one, but it's damaged and would seem a bit stupid to use it. Here is its replacement, a seriously trimmed down and precision made race door shaft from MB. To get the gearbox functioning, I'm going to get rid of this worn out gear selector and shove in this new one from India. The next stage is to fit the new firmer gear selector spring and locating balls in, which apparently you can just squeeze in with your fingers and slide the selector down the Layshaft. Well, my fat little fingers couldn't manage that, so with the aid of some bolts and a lot of patience, I finally got the whole lot together. With a quick smear of grease, I slip in the new gear selector arm bush and tap it home with my punch. Now to prepare the assembled Layshaft with a modicum of blue Loctite in the O-ring's aperture. A cheeky little tip from the MB site, this should make for a completely sealed rear hub bearing setup. With the Layshaft in place, it's time to make sure it's fully seated against the bearing's inner race, and for that I'm going to use this handy dandy little Layshaft puller from MB. With that lot securely in place, I can now prepare for one of the few original parts to go back into the motor, the selector wishbone. Now the actual wishbone component is fine, but the pulls are knackered. Their replacements are going to be these oversized ones. To get these to fit I will need to enlarge the holes in the wishbone slightly, so out comes my very Mickey Mouse drill press. With the hole sorted, I can now assemble the wishbone setup. The pulls are now fitted and secured with nylock nuts instead of those funny little circlips Innocenti used. Now to the gear selector arm itself. This is the original LI item, which is actually fine, but if you're in for a penny you might as well be in for a pound. So I'm replacing it with this GP item from MB with a precision stud conversion. Basically it does away with the nasty circlips holding this linkage together. So after greasing up the shaft and fitting the sealing O-ring and selector arm shim, I can slide the whole lot in. Now what you see me doing is adding a dab of grease in the upper shim to hold it in place on the crankcase while I slip the wishbone in and slide in the gear selector arm through. When all in position and with the aid of a screwdriver prising the collection shims firmly together, I can pop the securing bolt in. This was all done with the selector in second gear and the arm facing straight at me, and now for a quick check to make sure all the gear positions are selecting, along with some mild panic as I trap my fingers under the whole bleeding lot. See how hard I am? I didn't cry or anything. With the Layshaft and selector system fitted, I can now get the gear cluster in. I've applied a little squirt of oil into the casing bush and then slipping the cluster shim into the bottom of the cluster. A whole lot can go into place. With that lot spinning nicely, we can now test fit the end plate. Without fitting the gears themselves, I can fit the plate in place to make sure that the shafts locate into the bearing and bush properly, and the plate sits securely into the case. This test fit immediately showed a problem, as you can see from the plate rocking around. This turned out to be the new sill bush I had fitted into the end plate, and as you can see here, there's an outrageous difference in sizes. Great. So, with the new bush removed, I refit the original, which luckily had no serious wear on the bearing face. After that and another test fit, I'm happy with the fit now and can get on with getting the gears inside. The gears you see me fitting here are new GP200 ones from Sill, one of the few Indian parts I've heard of no serious quality problems with. Fitting them into place and checking they mesh correctly with the gear cluster, it's time to work out which gearbox shim is going to be needed. There's a large selection of sizes available, and with this being a ground up rebuild, I thought it'd be a good idea to get them all, as I had no idea which one would be used. To start off with, I used a recommended thickness and went about test fitting the end plate again, just using 4 bolts to make sure the gears moved freely and the plate could be secured. Now, it was well just snugging down these bolts. About now I heard a bang, and watch closely, you can see the bolt tighten and suddenly free up. Oh bollocks. Time for more problem solving. The culprits were not hard to find, just stupid air never noticed. The main casing and end plate were made and matched in the factory as a dedicated pair, and as you can see, mine aren't. This was all going to lead to some serious problems shimming out this gearbox. Most people complain about large gaps of shim. I had the opposite and no gap at all to play with. I've spared you the whole monotonous rebuild I had to go through, as I was not sure which bit had moved, but basically I stripped the back end back down to a bare case and went through the whole build up process again. What you're seeing here is a final fitting process of the whole second attempt. With some fiddling and more than a couple of test fits, I finally worked out which thickness shim to use. So now I can get the end plate tightened up whilst checking for free movement of the gears and that there's some play for the shim. What a palaver. Wow, that was a lot more work than I anticipated. Let's see if the clutch goes on easier. So, with the gearbox fitted, it's now on with the clutch. First thing on is the clutch shim. And as with the gearbox shims, I decided it would be prudent to get all the sizes, as I had no idea which one would be relevant. Due to the chain case faces being mullered at some point, I went with the thinnest one to start out with. Now to the clutch unit itself. Here's the original, minus that destroyed basket, and here's the replacement, an AF 6-plate row clutch. This new clutch now has a 46 tooth crown wheel, which in conjunction with a 19 tooth drive sprocket I'm going to fit, and the GP200 gearbox that's been fitted, it should give me the correct final drive ratio for my top end setup. This I worked out using the very helpful gear chart on AF Race Speed's website. This clutch also has the LI top bearing pressure plate fitted. It usually comes with a GP type. So let's temporarily put that in place, as I first need to see what thickness oil thrower washer I'm going to need to make sure I get the chain line correct. Thankfully MB stock a few different size washers, so I should be able to get the chain line spot on. Starting off with a middle size one and using some very gentle persuasion, I slip the original drive sleeve onto the crank splines. Back to the drive sprockets, here's the original Innocenti one, which I'm going to replace with this BGM item. Next up I'm going to use this brilliant little attachment for my drop gauge to help set the chain line, again a useful tool from MB. Awkward to use, but it immediately showed me the chain line, using the teeth, not the chain itself I should add, was off. Due to the exacting tolerances of the BGM crank, I'm going to need another little tool from MB to pull the drive sleeve off, so I could try the next size oil thrower washer. So it's somewhere the thickest washer, and using the chain line tool again, I can see the teeth on the sprocket and the crown wheel are aligned. So let's get the chain on and make sure the actual drive line is correct. First I'm going to need to get the chain guides in place. Here's the original Innocenti ones, which will be replaced with these SIL DP lower guide and an MB chain guide. And immediately a problem arises, as you can see the lower guide is too long. A closer inspection shows manufacturing differences. I thought the GP one would work. Well, poked by another one, I'm just going to mess about with the original. So it's out with the angle grinder and Dremel again, and after cutting bits off and lengthening the fitting holes, I ended up with my very own custom lower chain guide. And after lubing up the drive sleeve with some Gearbox oil, assembled a new Ivis chain. Back up to the primary drive again, you can see I need to replace the original drive cap. As mentioned in the engine strip down and engine case repair episode, it's very obvious that somebody never did the primary drive up, resulting in damage present on and in the chain case. This nonsense also killed this cap, so it's on with this new SIL cap. Next up I'm leaving some Sharpie marks on the new cap so I can judge where the splines are on the drive sleeve when I tighten this lot down. As you can see from the differing heights of my original and the new drive spring, it's just as well I bought the replacement, as the original's obviously getting a bit tired. Same with this drive bolt. After all the action this poor little bolt seen, it seems only fair to retire it and fit this quality drive bolt from MB in its place. Armed with these new parts and the original Innocenti drive dog, I can assemble the primary drive. It should now be obvious why I marked the drive cap, as you can no longer see the splines on the drive sleeve when the primary drive is all together. With that lot all nipped up, I can look at getting the upper chain guide in. And with that in place I can finally get the main clutch nut torqued up. That nut and the primary drive bolt have some of the highest torque settings on the Lambretta. And so it was time for a bit of off-camera floor action in an attempt to persuade my torque ratchet that I'd tighten these fasteners up correctly. Yeah, it was a struggle. Anyway, with them done up, it's time to tighten the chain, and the rule of thumb seems to be about 6mm of play present once the guides are tightened up. Happy with that, and another quick check with the chainline tool, it now looks like I have most of the scooter's engine together. Blimey, it almost looks like a completed motor. Bit of luck next time I can get the cover on and some oil in it. That'll be nice. See you later.